Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I bring you the U.S. national champion, Mr. Tariq Patel. Now, U.S. national champion is kind of like it's like a fleeting title because you can only hold that for so long. And I know that RTN season's coming around the corner, but it's fascinating to me because Worlds is unannounced so far. But to you, as we start this off, this video is going to be about basically the top 5, Blitz lists that you should be thinking about moving into the Las Vegas calling happening in about a few days from now. But to you, Tariq, just out of curiosity, what is the bigger deal, winning the Pro Tour or winning Worlds? Like, what's the bigger crown, so to speak?
They're both big to me, and I honestly haven't put much thought into it. At this point, I'd say probably Worlds, just because it'd be really cool to call yourself the world champion at anything. But I'm happy to take what I can get, honestly. So I haven't put too much stock into it. And I will say, I am moving back to Canada. So if I retire and I go play in the Canadian Nationals, I will forever be the U.S. national champion. So
that's pretty sweet. I mean, I think it was like Brett Hull. Brett Hull, I think, is a dual citizen and played for the U.S. over Canada, and that was a huge deal back in the day. Brett Hull playing for the U.S. while the Canadians were like, "You traitorous bastard." But hey, if you want to do it, come to the Canada and play for us. No problem, no worries. But we got like some good talent up here, so I don't think it's going to be as much of a cakewalk for you to just kind of win that. So. I'm sorry. Either way, it's so good to have you on, man. Every time that you're on, it's always a blast. But let's get to business, which is the fact that the Uprising World Premiere is occurring in Las Vegas. Today is the 5th of June, and that'll be going down in a few days by the time that this is all published and tucked away. But I want to talk to you about Blitz decks, because Blitz is the order of business, and it's not just Blitz, it's Team Blitz. So you don't need just one list, because you can kind of throw out one list, Tark, and be like, all right, this is what you want to lean on if you're not really sure. But it's a team game, so you need 3. So how about you give us 5 Blitz decks to think about moving into the calling in Las Vegas?
Yeah, for sure. So Blitz is a format that I wasn't super versed with before testing for this event. And I will say, after jumping into it, it's been a ton of fun, and I've actually really enjoyed myself. Looking back over the last couple of events, it's natural to start with the Battle Hardening that happened over Pro Tour in New Jersey, and to look at the top 2 decks at that time. So this very new defensive Oldhim build ended up winning, and in second place came Kano. So naturally, I think those are the first 2 decks we'll start with. So my deck number 1 that everybody should be either prepared for or playing, one or the other, would be Oldhim. At this point, there are 2 different ways to build the deck. There is an offensive build of Oldhim, one with Endless Winter and Pummels and a full aggression style. And the better one, in my opinion, is the full defensive Oldhim, which runs almost 20 defense reactions and does nothing but blocking and fatiguing your opponent until they kind of tap out. So for me, the first deck on my list to both test and test against would be Oldhim.
That's a good call there. And also, I have to echo what you're saying. I really did not like Blitz until I basically forced myself to practice and learn a lot of it. And then I was like, you know what? This is not so bad. Games are definitely short, few margins for error, but it's nice to see, equipment blocks like on the first turn. Like, that's kind of cool. There's really no room for error, and it's a good way that to start off is by like saying Oldhim, defensive Oldhim. Slower games, you got to know what you're doing. I feel, especially since time is usually your enemy when you're playing a control style. You need to be able to look at your hand and have the muscle memory to say, okay, this is exactly what I'm doing. And you mentioned Kano as well. It's kind of like the other side of the spectrum. You have this very, this steadfast control build of Oldhim versus the, set fire to the house and roll a grenade in the room kind of Kano list.
Yeah, so Kano would be my number 2 deck. It's a deck that's recently broken out in Classic Constructed, thanks to the Arsenal Pass team that took it to a Pro Tour top 8. But it's also quite potent in Blitz as well, which honestly was surprising to me when I first started playing the format, because everybody in Blitz has 11 equipment slots. Everybody has as much Arcane Barrier or Spell Void as they possibly would want. So, but Kano does have some tricks up his sleeve. The ability to play at instant speed when your opponent pitches a card in place of the combat chain means sometimes they don't have cards in hand to pitch for Arcane Barrier. So Kano is a very potent threat by itself. And it's another deck that I highly recommend the people that play it. If you do end up playing it, you need to practice it a lot. It's not a deck you can just kind of pick up and take to your local event. It's something that you have to sit down and play with by yourself for, a couple of hours to really make sure you understand the lines. But I wouldn't be surprised if Kano is another popular deck for this weekend out in Vegas.
Yeah, skill cap on Kano, I feel, is one of the highest out there. Chane is another one that's very difficult to kind of master. It's one of those decks that you really, like you mentioned, you got to put the work in. But the beauty of Kano is that you can get a lot of work done mastering the deck merely by goldfishing it by yourself. So you don't necessarily need someone else on the receiving end. All right, another deck, third deck.
So third deck, the way I like to do it is when I establish kind of the two premier decks of the format, my next step is then to identify what deck kind of has favorable matchups into defensive Oldhim, into Kano. And for me, that is Rhinar. So there's been a lot of buzz on the online community, even though you haven't seen it really have a breakout event in a single player event. We are playing a team event in Vegas. So if your team are showing up to Vegas and you're expecting a lot of Oldhim and a lot of Kano, then Rhinar might be the perfect deck for you. It has such a good matchup into defensive Oldhim because of the ability to intimidate, 3 to 4 cards from their hand, making it impossible for the Oldhim to block out damage. And then you just chunk them for about 16 points of damage, sometimes even more. And they're just in an unwinnable position from there. So for me, Rhinar is the third deck. And the same thing with Kano, already starting on 15 life. If you get a big Blood Rush Bellow turn and you get their hand, they're dead in the water and there's nothing they can do. So for me, Rhinar would be deck number 3.
Yeah, Intimidate is such a nasty little element to get through and actually connect for damage. And like you mentioned, when you're going against something like Oldhim, if you're able to intimidate away their fuel to actually play their defense reactions, it's just as good as getting 2 cards sometimes. Intimidating the pitch value means that they can't play their defense reaction, means that you're cleared for landing.
Exactly.
Fourth deck.
Fourth deck for me is actually Kassai. So Kassai is a deck that I've recently come around on. It's not a deck that I originally thought was very good, and largely in part because the most Blitz I played was during the Viserai format. So in the context of, that format, Kassai was a little bit more underpowered, I'd say, compared to the rest of the format. Now, Kassai does have some holes. She's not the strongest into Kano, but she does have the ability to grind and Oldhim. She has very good armor equipment slots. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a big resurgence of Kassai as well. There's always been diehard Kassai fans in Blitz. And, I've had fun testing out the deck and playing with and against it. So Kassai for me is number 4 on my list.
All right, you mentioned real briefly here about the importance of the equipment slots and how good they are, and in Blitz, just how important, even more so, they are than in CC. Can you just give us like a couple seconds here about just the sheer importance of having, 11 sideboard slots? One of them is typically going to be your weapon, but with 10 slots for equipment, how important is having equipment that gets work done?
Oh, it is super important. You look at a class like Ninja, I tested a lot of Katsu, a lot of Benji, a lot of Ira even to see, because, their combo lines are absolutely fantastic and their damage output is through the roof, higher than Runeblade at certain times, with not a lot of cards needed to really facilitate the combo and get it going. But where Ninja significantly lacks, and it's very similar to Ranger in this respect, is that they lack equipment to kind of back it up. So even though they have a ton of damage output, the lack of block 2 equipments or the lack of armor on the swing back means that, even though their damage output is high, their ability to prevent damage and win a potential race is not necessarily there. And that's why we see decks like Kassai, who honestly are a little bit less offensively talented than the Ninja variants, tend to be a little bit better into the open metagame because they have the bracers, they have the chest piece, they have the legs that block over and over again. So the armor is huge in Blitz, especially when you start with such a low life total. You really need that extra 6 to 8 points of life wherever you can get them.
All right, last deck that you believe is going to be, possibly on like a winning roster for Calling Las Vegas.
So last deck for me, and I'm going to kind of cheat here and pick 2 decks because I have a love of Runeblade. So for me, that is Chane Briar. Both Runeblades are extremely solid into the entire metagame. Both Chane and Briar do have Spell Void equipment. And I do believe they're the only class with Spell Void too, in Shock Charmers and Ebonfold for Chane. I guess you can say Levia has it too. But Spell Void is one of the most potent threats against Kano. So in that you can run Arcane Barrier 2 plus a Spell Void, and then Snapdragon Scalers for Go Again means you can put an insane amount of pressure into Kano while also having a Spell Void 2, even if you use every card from your hand. And it can really hinder their Wildfire turns, even if you have no defensive values. As to which one's better, I'm not necessarily sure yet. Right now, I'm leaning more towards Chane than Briar, just because I feel like Chane has, Carrion Husk, and be able to start with, 30 life, sometimes 31 if you're running Spellbound Creepers instead of Snapdragon Scalers, is just absolutely massive. Now, a lot of people have told me the Oldhim matchup isn't the best for either Runeblade, which is definitely true. You're a slight dog. So going into the Trios tournament, if you're expecting every team to be on Oldhim, you really need to have a plan if you're playing either Chane or Briar to triumph over the Guardian matchup.
I feel you on that, absolutely. And at that point, at that juncture, I mean, you just gave us 5.5 lists, as it were, of really significant lists to watch out for. But, at the end of the day, I'm sure you can agree that it's the player agency in terms of determining the wins. I mean, how much of this is just, how much you practice and how much you know your list and your opponent's list. I mean, you said that, in certain cases you'll be a dog. There's going to be favorites in when, on paper, but ultimately practice and just knowing the matchups and finding your avenues to victory are going to be the determining factor here, right?
Oh, of course. It's so important to know your decks inside and out. And it's actually interesting when I talk to my friends, because we will test certain matchups and we'll have like wildly different results. I'll have people tell me that XYZ matchup, like the Kano matchup is very good into Oldhim. And then I'll have other people that tell me, Oldhim crushes Kano. And, for me, I am the belief that Oldhim beats Kano like 85%, maybe 90% of the time. But, I have great Kano friends like Brendan Patrick, who is adamant that that's just not correct, and Oldhim wins. So clearly, they're doing something a little bit different than maybe the average Kano player isn't doing, and it'll be great to kind of get everybody playing for real stakes to see, where everything shakes out and how it turns out.
Yeah, it's not just about net decking, people. I always say, I'm like, if it was just about net decking, then anybody can win a tournament just by downloading a list. So practice the game, friends. Tariq, thank you so much for coming on the show and just giving us your insights again. You're not going to be in Vegas, or will you be there?
I will be there. So I made a kind of last second trip, and I will be in Vegas playing with Rob Seigel and Saint Hung.
Oh, damn. That's a pretty potent team. I like it. Awesome stuff. Well, Tariq, thank you so much. If anybody wants more insight from Tariq, where can we find you?
You can find me over at Twitter at Tariq Patel 10. I also do vlogs over at 983 Media. So if you want to follow me along for tournaments, you can catch me there. And then I do write articles on channelfireball.com. I should have an article coming up the next day or so on this very topic, on the 5 decks that I would recommend to play in Blitz. So stay tuned and you can check them out there.
There you go, friends. Thank you again to the U.S. National Champion, Tariq Patel. Friends, don't forget you're not losing if you're learning. So keep playing the game. We'll catch you next time on Instant Speed. Bye-bye.